The defense stat is one of the most important stats in Generation 1, as many of the strongest attacking types in the game are physical attacks. So today, we're going to be going over which Pokemon have the highest defense in the game, and if it's enough to carry them into relevance. And starting us off at number 10, we have Sandslash. This is a pure ground type with a rather meager special stat of 55, a speed stat of 65, and its HP being a decent 75, along with its true calling being its 100 attack and 110 defense. Sandslash at first glance looks like an incredibly forgettable Pokemon, due to its lack of a secondary typing and meager special stat. However, Sandslash has an incredibly dangerous niche thanks to its access to the incredible Swords Dance. Swords Dance is a stat boosting move which raises the user's attack stat by 2 stages, which effectively doubles the user's attacks after one use. Thanks to Sandslash's massive 100 attack, it's able to 2-hit KO nearly every single Pokemon in the game with a mixture of Earthquake and Hyper Beam. Sandslash is also very accessible due to being in Route 4 directly after the Cerulean Gym, so you can have a strong ground type for the Electric Gym immediately after, and the Poison Gym much later. Sandslash is quite a unique Pokemon competitively, as it resides in the lowest tier in the entire game, being ZU. But its unique trait of having Stab Earthquake and access to Swords Dance means it has seen sparse play in the overused tier, aka the most common tier of play in Smog. Most other ground types, such as Rhydon and Golem, have a 4 times weakness to the common water type, and even Pokemon such as Nidoqueen and King have a much more diverse move pool, but lack Swords Dance, or are weak to the broken Psychic type. Sandslash may be generally worse than the other ground types due to its much lower stat spread, but its access to Swords Dance and lack of excessive weaknesses lets it call out a niche most other ground types can't replicate. And at number 9, we have Slowbro. This is a Psychic and Water type with an awful speed stat of 30 and an attack and special of 75 and 80 respectively. However, Slowbro has a wonderful 95 HP and a defense of 110 similar to Sandslash. Slowbro is known in Generation 1 as one of the most all-or-nothing Pokemon in the franchise, as its game plan is centered around the move Amnesia. For those of you who are unaware, Amnesia in Generation 1 worked a little differently to how it does today. Amnesia currently gives your Pokemon a +2 boost to special defense. However, due to Generation 1 not having special defense, it simply gives you a +2 in your special stat, meaning you get double special attack and defense for the price of one move. Slowbro was by far the best non-legendary user of Amnesia due to its powerful move pool with access to coverage like Fire Blast and Ice Beam, but also its Psychic typing giving it an edge over every other Amnesia user in the game. However, as we previously mentioned, Slowbro is known as the all-or-nothing Pokemon, which is mainly due to the fact that beyond its defense and HP, Slowbro has rather middling stats, especially its 30 speed, making it the slowest fully evolved Pokemon in the game. If you cannot begin the Amnesia sweep, it is very difficult for Slowbro to actually make dents in teams, especially against its main Psychic and Water type competition Starmie, as it can soak every move Slowbro learns and fire back with a powerful Thunderbolt. Slowbro is rather easy to obtain in a playthrough, as you can catch one immediately after the 4th gym, giving you a powerful Psychic and Water type for the Poison and Fire gyms. Slowbro is an incredible Pokemon, but is very risky to use. But if you're willing to take the risk for an Amnesia boost, you can run through entire teams with it with ease. And at number 8, we have Kingler. This is a pure water type with an awful HP of 55 and an even worse special of 50. It also has a mediocre 75 speed. However, Kingler has an amazing 115 defense and an even better 130 attack, making it tied for the second highest attack in the game. Kingler is a monster due to having the highest attack in combination with access to Swords Dance and Hyper Beam, which in tandem with being 10 speed faster than Sandslash means Kingler has the highest attack of any Swords Dance user in the game, but is also faster than a large number of other powerful options. Kingler's water typing is a bit of a burden, however, as water is a special type in Generation 1, meaning that Kingler uses its pitiful 50 special to determine all damage from water type attacks. Kingler does have a slight edge over fellow physical water types like Poliwrath, in the fact that Kingler was blessed with an amazing signature move in Crabhammer. Crabhammer is a base 90 water move with a high critical hit ratio, which in Generation 1 is effectively a guaranteed critical hit dealing double damage. Kingler does struggle a lot from Pokemon such as Starmie and Zapdos, which can fire off powerful electric type moves, and who can switch in on a Hyper Beam or a Crab Hammer without taking too much damage. In a playthrough, Kingler can be rather frustrating to use as you need the Super Rod to catch one after the 4th gym. And at that point of the game, there is a myriad of other water types available to you. In competitive play, Kingler really relies on his teammates, as it really wants to clean up fully paralyzed teams, and loves being paired with Zapdos to deal with powerful walls, such as the previously mentioned Starmie. All of this leaves Kingler down in the never used tier, just barely avoiding the lowest tier in the game. But that doesn't mean Kingler is worthless. It just requires far more setup than the other more consistent Pokemon. And at number 7, we have Tangela. This is a pure grass type with 55 attack, 60 speed, and 65 HP, along with its first good stats being 100 special and 115 defense. At first glance, Tangela seems like a very weak Pokemon, as even with extremely high defenses, it's extremely slow, and its HP stat is just not enough to take repeated hits throughout the game. However, Tangela has a few tricks up its sleeve. First off, Tangela has access to the absurd Sleep Powder, which is a 75% accurate status move which puts your opponent to sleep for 1 to 7 turns, including a turn to wake up. Sleep in Generation 1 is absurdly strong, especially down in the underused tier where most Pokemon rely on the far less accurate Hypnosis for the same results. Tangela also has access to Bind, which is effectively the same move as Wrap, which stuns your opponent in place for 2 to 5 turns as long as Tangela doesn't miss the attack. Bind is a worse move than Wrap due to having 10 less accuracy, which in tandem with Tangela's awful speed means it's usually not a wonderful option, unless the target is already paralyzed thanks to Tangela's Stun Spore. Tangela is rather frustrating to obtain in a playthrough, as you can catch one directly under Pallet Town once you're able to surf. However, at that point in the game, you have a myriad of similar powerful grass types such as the starter Pokemon Venusaur or the incredible Victory Bell, who can be found on one of the first routes in the game. However, Victory Bell is exclusive to Pokemon Blue, and in Red, your only other grass type options beyond your starter are the unusable Vileplume or hunting in the Safari Zone for Executor. So Tangela is the most accessible option for a usable grass type. Tangela is rather weird in competitive play, as it's effectively lacking in any way to deal damage, but its incredible support move pool and great bulk manages to allow Tangela to just barely hold a niche. And at number 6, we have Weezing. This is a pure poison type with extremely mediocre stats, from its laughable 60 speed, 65 HP, to its 85 special and bizarre 90 attack. Weezing's only real claim to fame is its weirdly high 120 defense stat. Weezing is an anomaly in Generation 1, as it doesn't really do anything, and can only be found in a playthrough at the end of the game, directly before the ground type gym where it's at its weakest. Weezing does have a few slightly positive traits, as it's fairly bulky, and it has a very decent move pool with moves like Fire Blast, Thunderbolt, and Explosion. Explosion especially is an incredible move for any Pokemon to have, as it halves your opponent's defense stat before firing off an incredible base 170 normal attack, which can one-hit KO nearly anything in the game. However, even with those niche attributes, Weezing just can't find any competitive niche even all the way at the lowest tier of the game, due to its absolutely miserable poison typing. The poison type at first glance may seem okay, as it only has 2 weaknesses. But those 2 weaknesses are 2 of the best types in the entire game, in Ground and Psychic. The poison typing is so debilitating that even Pokemon like the not fully evolved Graveler and Drowsy can destroy the fully evolved duo of Muck and Weezing in 2 attacks, while the only way the duo can defeat those 2 Pokemon before fainting is to sacrifice themselves with Explosion. Even the not fully evolved Ghastly is a better poison type in the lowest tier of competitive, due to being immune to the normal typing, which is such a benefit that Muck and Weezing are effectively unusable. Weezing is an awful Pokemon, and is a perfect example as to how unviable any poison type in Generation 1 is without the blessing of a secondary typing. And at number 5, we have Rhydon. This is a rock and ground type with 40 speed, 45 special, along with an insane 105 HP, 120 defense, and a 130 attack stat. Rhydon is a beast in competitive play, as it's undoubtedly the best ground type in the entire game, due to not only its incredible stats, but also its extremely deep move pool. Rhydon has access to the standard Earthquake, Rock Slide, and Body Slam that you'd expect, but also moves like Surf, Thunderbolt, Fire Blast, and Blizzard, which gives Rhydon coverage on nearly every Pokemon in the game. Rhydon initially had competition from other rock and ground types in Golem, as Golem had access to Explosion in place of its 20 less attack than Rhydon. But as time passed, most people accepted Rhydon as the superior Pokemon competitively. Rhydon unfortunately shares the same fate as other powerful Pokemon in that it's stuck in the Safari Zone, which means Rhydon is effectively unusable in a playthrough unless you're unimaginably patient or you get extremely lucky. Rhydon's status as the best ground type is also helped by its Earthquake being the strongest move in the entire game without a drawback, such as recoil. Rhydon does have a rather difficult type with Pokemon such as Executor and Cloyster, as they resist Earthquake and can reliably take 3 to 4 rock slides before going down, which gives them ample time to fight back. The only real downside of Rhydon's typing is its debilitating 4-time weakness to grass and water, which leaves it vulnerable to 2 of the most common types in the game. While this can be detrimental to other Pokemon with 2 4-time weaknesses, Rhydon is so incredible that it can somewhat power through its weaknesses. Rhydon is such an influential Pokemon that it basically defies any team whose goal is to spread paralysis over the course of a game to set up a slow sweeper, due to Rhydon's awful speed being its main flaw. Rhydon is an incredible force in the metagame, along with being an auto-win for a playthrough if you manage to find one in the Safari Zone. And at number 4, we have Omastar. This is a rock and water type with a quite awful 55 speed, 60 attack, along with a mediocre 70 HP. However, Omastar's 115 special and 125 defense is what really sets it apart from the other rock and water type Kabutops. Omastar is a fairly solid Pokemon, really only hurt by its lackluster coverage, as it's stuck without any rock type coverage at all, meaning anything with a high special stat or a water type in can make it useless in a battle. Omastar is one of the 3 fossil Pokemon in Generation 1, alongside Kabutops and Aerodactyl, which means that you cannot revive them until the 7th gym in the game, where they're 20 levels below the gym leader's Pokemon. This means it's extremely frustrating to use an Omastar in a casual playthrough. In the competitive scene, Omastar is the best of its trio due to having the highest special stat, which means it can actually deal good damage with its Hydro Pump and Ice Beam. Omastar resides in the underused tier in Smog. However, there have been attempts to make it work in the overused tier due to its unique typing and bulk. Omastar is one of the most effective normal type walls in the game, as most Tauros and Snorlax cannot even deal 50% with Earthquake or Explosion, which can be devastating as those are 2 of the best Pokemon in the entire game. Omastar does have 2 debilitating flaws, being its typing and aforementioned move pool. Omastar's water and rock typing leaves it in a perfect position against any fire, flying, or normal type. However, any electric, water, or especially grass types tear it to pieces in a single attack. Omastar's lack of rock coverage really ruins its chances in the OU tier, as the tier's best electric type Zapdos can wall it entirely without fear of taking a rock slide boosted by the 1.5 times stab boost. Omastar is also somewhat outclassed in the underused tier as well, due to the other water bulky types such as Tentacruel and Vaporeon doing its job but far more effectively. Omastar isn't a terrible Pokemon. However, it just lacks a solid place in either metagame, which leaves it languishing as a rather forgettable Pokemon in the first generation. And at number 3, we have Golem. This is another rock and ground type with an abysmal 45 speed, 55 special, alongside a wonderful 80 HP, 110 attack, and an absurd 130 defense stat. Golem is an icon of the generation, as for decades it and Rhydon battled for dominance in the overused tier due to the similarities and incredible power. Golem has a slightly worse overall stat spread, however it was faster, which meant Rhydon had a difficult time dealing with it. But what really let Golem hold its own in OU placement was its access to Explosion. Explosion was the only move that really kept Golem in the OU tier. However, that was really the only positive Golem had. Eventually, most people moved to Rhydon for their rock and ground type, as its better all-around stat spread was far more valuable. Golem surprisingly fared much worse in the UU tier, as its usual targets of Zapdos and Jolteon were still in OU, and the lower tier had far more water types to exploit Golem's 4-time weakness. Golem's typing is extremely easy to exploit in the UU tier, thanks to how common Pokemon like Vaporeon, Tangela, and Venusaur are. Golem also struggles with certain Pokemon it was supposed to check, such as Raichu and Articuno, due to its pitiful 55 special. As if they can switch in safely on Golem, a single Surf or Ice Beam could knock it out instantly. However, Golem does have one insanely useful benefit over Rhydon, and that's in a playthrough. Golem is obtainable in Mount Moon after the first gym if you're able to access trait evolutions. And it learns Earthquake at level 31, so it's incredibly useful in a playthrough, as it can deal with most of the gyms in the game and a large chunk of the Elite Four on its own, with a combination of Rock Slide and Earthquake. While it has fallen off in recent years, Golem is still a solid rock type with good stats and a great move pool. And at number 2, we have our third and final rock and ground type with awful stats, Onix. This Pokemon has one of the worst stats in the game with 30 special, 35 HP, and 45 attack, with a barely passable 70 speed. However, Onix for some reason has an utterly appalling 160 defense stat. Onix is a really bizarre Pokemon in Generation 1, as it's one of the worst fully evolved Pokemon, not just in the game, but of all time. Onix is one of the 3 ground and rock types in Generation 1, and is so much worse than the other 2 that their pre-evolved forms Rhyhorn and Geodude have higher stats beyond defense exactly. Onix can be obtained after the second gym, which means that at that point you'd have access to Sandshrew and Geodude, who are substantially better than Onix. Onix does have a good move pool, surprisingly. It has access to Rock Slide, Earthquake, Explosion, and Bind, which means it isn't completely useless. However, its attack and speed are so pitiful that it can't even use them to decent effect. Onix is a joke in Generation 1, as it's so well known as being weak that most people who've never played competitive Pokemon have likely heard the joke that Onix has less attack than an Oddish, which isn't even the only stat Oddish is better in, as it has more HP and special than Onix as well. Onix is so underpowered that there is not a single fully evolved Pokemon in the game that gets KO'd from full health by its explosion. Even the miserably bad Beedrill takes only 90% of its HP. Onix is one of the worst Pokemon in the game, which makes its incredible defense stat even more astonishing, as it feels like an afterthought to give it one good stat as an apology for everything else. And finally, at number 1, we have Cloyster. This is a water and ice type with 50 HP, 70 speed, along with 85 special, 95 attack, and an absurd 180 defense stat, which is not only the best defensive stat in Generation 1, but also the 4th best defensive stat all the way through Generation 9. Cloyster is not only a defensive juggernaut, but also one of the most unique Pokemon in Generation 1. Cloyster has access to its own signature move in Clamp, which is the water-type version of Bind, which does 35 damage to lock your opponent's Pokemon in place for 2 to 5 turns. This, along with Cloyster's decent speed and access to Explosion and Stab Blizzard, means it's one of the hardest hitting Pokemon in the OU tier. Cloyster is also incredible in a playthrough, as you can obtain one right after the 4th gym, and it learns Ice Beam on its own, so no need to use your limited TMs. Cloyster does have a few flaws holding it back in OU, as the myriad of electric type attacks can stop almost anything Cloyster tries to do with ease. Cloyster also struggles from being paralyzed, as Clamp isn't as effective, and Cloyster can be easily taken out by a grass or electric type attack while being unable to fight back. Cloyster's ice typing is both a blessing and a curse, as it allows Cloyster immunity from being frozen by opposing blizzards. However, it does give Cloyster a weakness to Rock Slide from the common Rhydon. Cloyster is an excellent Pokemon in the OU tier, and even with its weaknesses, it's still a menace in the tier to this day.